Hey everyone, welcome to the Pregnancy After 40 podcast. We are broadcasting live again. We have a great guest. As always, we have Jaren Soloff, who is joining us today. Jaren is a nutritionist, also a lactation consultant and specialist. She just released a new book called the Postnatal Cookbook. So she's got really good, not just recipes, but she has really good information as far as the history of getting women back to where they need to be nutrition wise, health wise, towards the end of their pregnancy, and as well as postpartum. It's something that's not really stressed enough. I don't believe it is in the care that women need to take. So she kind of goes into some history um, and again, some recipes and things that women need to do in order to increase the quality and quantity of their breast milk and just nutrition wise, just taking care of ourselves overall. So, Jaren, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the group that you've put together too. It sounds amazing in what you're offering.
It is. So, like I said, we've got a lot of women in here who are currently pregnant. Of course, everyone's over 40, and those who have recently had babies as well who are nursing. And so, congratulations on the new book.
Thank you so much. I know I haven't had time to let it all settle in.
Yeah, that's awesome. So excited for you. So we are just going to start off with some simple questions, or just go into some questions that I, came up with after reading the book. So the first thing that I want to talk about is just culturally, what is the difference between how different cultures across the world versus the U.S. and how we care for mothers during the postpartum phase? Because I found this to be really, really interesting. So if you can just kind of tell us the history of that and what the difference is and what we can do in order to support new mothers during the postpartum period.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that question. I think it's something so understandable. Is everything okay?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. It looks like, there's so many different pieces that really come into play in terms of what affects it culturally. So there has been some great research and literature done on different cultures and what's called the first 40 days and how that really impacts a mother's nutrition status. So the piece that I think is really impactful for moms in more Western cultures like America is that we really just don't have a structure that supports that. So what's really distinctly different is just the way that other cultures approach and care for moms during postpartum. So that's really reflected in larger social constructs we have, like maternity leave and having, paid time for bonding and breastfeeding and really having structures that support that. But there's also some differences in the way that they care for mothers nutrition wise and the way that they support their recovery. So that might look like in other cultures that are, more non-Western. It's really common to have more intergenerational living, so other family members living with them, particularly, other females such as their mother or, cousins or other people from the other part of the family that are coming together to be able to support mom. And that might mean picking up other household tasks or doing most of the grocery shopping or cooking preparation. We really just don't have that in our culture and society. And I think it's something that is part of the gap for us. So it's, really understandable why mothers are really struggling in this environment, not only to recover from birth, but also, all those different factors that affect us postpartum, going back to work, keeping our milk supply up, and all of those different pieces.
Okay. So I'm going to go back a little bit. How did you become involved in really focusing on the postpartum period for women, nutrition wise and health wise, and even just exploring and going to the history of the care for mothers? How did you get involved?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a great question. Also involves just my personal experience. I think, we were just chatting. I know you have little ones, and our experiences as mothers completely change us. And so, I had already been in school to be a dietitian when I got pregnant with my daughter. And it was also during my own experience breastfeeding that I really felt really passionate not only about nutrition needs, because there really isn't much information on what happens after birth and what that means nutrition wise. There's tons of information on pregnancy, not so much on postpartum, but also breastfeeding. I didn't even know what a lactation consultant was after I gave birth, and that they were actually a position and a job. So that really inspired my work of, okay, we need not only nutrition support, but we also need breastfeeding. And obviously breastfeeding support is huge impact in terms of nutrition. So certainly my personal experience, and also, just my framework, I think, in social justice too, and really wanting to try to bridge the gap for women and seeing how big of a gap exists just in our culture in terms of care for women after birth.
So after you had your daughter, did you have some struggles as far as, how you felt, nursing and all of that? And what did you do in order to help support that journey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I, had a really wonderful breastfeeding experience, even as a young mom. I think what comes to light more so for me and what I bring into my practice now is, my nutrition experience and my counseling I do now is more centered on supporting women who might have like food or body image concerns, which was definitely a part of my story. I have been in eating disorder recovery for years. I really struggled as an adolescent and a young adult. And those pieces really reared their heads in postpartum. I found that that wasn't just an isolated experience for me, that was actually really common. And, whether you've had a full-blown eating disorder in the past and are in recovery, or you've just, gone on different diets throughout your life, or struggled with your weight or body image concerns, postpartum period is actually a really risky time when those pieces can really activate. So that also connects to the breastfeeding experience, because there's a lot of different changes that go on with our appetite. It changes the way our body responds metabolically and hormone wise. Any one that has kind of talked to you about the postpartum period will just tell you how uncomfortable you might be in your body. So all of those issues can really come to a head at that time. So, it was less about having challenges, I guess, with breastfeeding, and more of understanding how all of these experiences really kind of came together, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So during your personal journey, how did you support yourself nutritionally? So the things that you wrote in your book and the recipes, did you actually use those recipes, or did you kind of struggle and have to figure things out on your own during that period while you were nursing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my daughter's 9, so this feels like forever ago. I wish I would have had something like this in postpartum, but there really hasn't been anything. Like, I can't recall anything, even any blogs or anything that was really focusing on, here's how to support yourself nutritionally after birth, right? Like, here's how much energy you need. I think the one thing that we hear commonly in postpartum is you need 500 extra calories, right? If you're breastfeeding. But what about moms who, choose not to or cannot breastfeed? They still deserve nutrition information that's going to support their recovery and healing. So when I was writing the cookbook, there's 2 parts. There's this more informational part about nutrition needs after birth, and then there's the actual recipes and cookbook part. And that was really important to me, because I wanted to make sure moms not only got, the recipes and how to apply it, but they understood, here's what I need to prioritize during this time for my health and for my nutrition. So I really just dug into the research when doing this book to try to put everything together to create that resource for moms.
Okay. So what tips do you have for women who actually are not going to breastfeed, or they're going to formula feed their babies from a nutrition standpoint? I'm assuming that there's some differences there, but what tips do you give for mothers who are going to formula feed?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, the nutrition needs are still there. So regardless of, whether you are breastfeeding or you are formula feeding, you still have to recover from birth, right? And one thing I talk about in the book too is, it really depends on what type of birth you have and how long you were in labor for, and if there were any complications or anything that came up during the birth process that's going to affect your nutrition needs after birth. But we know regardless that birth is like a marathon. So energy needs are going to be high, protein needs are going to be high, fluid needs are also going to be high as well. In terms of specifics, it's really going to be about making sure that you are honoring your body's hunger needs. Your metabolic rate is still going to be really high, which means that you're going to be using energy really efficiently. And that's going to stay regardless of whether you are breastfeeding or formula feeding. So typically the first 3 to 4 months, what we consider that fourth trimester, is when we want to consider that you're still in this phase of healing. So prioritizing your nutrition intake and recovery is going to be really important.
Okay. So in your book, you have a section that's titled the Acute Recovery Phase. So can you talk a little bit more about that and what that is and what women need to do during that period?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So acute just means, basically right after. So I'm thinking of, practical strategies of what do you do to meet your nutrition needs right after birth, right? And I talk a little bit in the book about how there's this huge hormone shift of after you deliver your baby and the placenta is delivered, there's this automatic trigger that happens hormone wise. So in the acute phase, it's really about repair. During birth, you typically lose a lot of fluids, and you also, depending on what type of labor you have, you lose a lot of energy too. So it's really about repletion during that time for the acute phase.
Okay. So what do you suggest that women do in order to, or what can they consume? What can they do for themselves in order to accelerate the recovery phase and as well as care for their energy needs? How do they get their energy back up after the acute recovery phase?
Right. So it really depends, and we're thinking like right after you give birth. So whether that's in a hospital, whether it's in a birth center, this first, 1 to 3 days. And I would say, if you deliver in a hospital, then you're going to get this amazing, this meal after that's going to taste amazing no matter what it is, because you haven't eaten for however long you've been in labor. But I would make sure that you're also preparing for your needs. You don't know how long going to be in labor for. So if that means, preparing snacks and bringing items into the hospital after, ordering them in, or to the birth center. But I also think of trying to establish your support network and think about that ahead of time too. So when you arrive home from the hospital or birth center or wherever you have your baby, is there anyone that can come over and cook or have meals ready for you? Is there anyone, or, you and your partner before the birth, can you start thinking about doing some batch meals and making leftovers and freezing them? So really thinking about having those items and that support network ahead of time. In terms of like specific foods, I would say it's more about just the quantity overall. I talk a little bit in the book about what we call macronutrients. So that's like our protein, carbs, and fats, and really focusing on just making sure, ideally protein is one that comes to mind in terms of healing right after birth, but it's really about focusing on just getting enough calories and energy overall. So some of those steps can really just help make sure you're really set up for that acute phase right after birth.
Okay. So the recipes that you have in your book, are any of those good for preparing before a woman delivers? Or are they more so things that need to be cooked after delivery?
Yep. So kind of a combination. I really wanted to make sure that most of the recipes were able to either be batch cooked or, every single recipe I put some kind of what I called mom hack, where you could either, take a shortcut to make sure that if you didn't have an ingredient, you could use something else in place of it, or if something needed to be cooked and it required more time, you could find something that was going to be a little more time efficient. But most of the recipes are designed to be batch cooked or, prepared in the freezer. Ideally, you're getting this book before you have your baby, because we're thinking about preparing for the fourth trimester. So Another thing to kind of think about is really even tabbing some of the favorite recipes that you like and going over them with your support network. So whether that's a postpartum doula who might be preparing meals for you, or your partner or family, and saying, would it be possible if you came up with these recipes? So that way they're there and they're ready for you and they meet your nutrition needs as well.
Okay. So, at what point do women or your clients actually come to you in their pregnancy or birth experience? Do they usually come to you before they've had the baby, or do they usually come to you after the baby's been born?
Yeah, that's a great question. Usually after, in the fourth trimester, and whether it's a breastfeeding concern or just a feeding concern overall, or mom wanting to look at her own diet or intake. But I really am encouraging, just like before pregnancy, we're thinking about preconception. Before postpartum, we're thinking about it in pregnancy. So that way we have a roadmap, because I think if, you chat with any mom after postpartum and they say, I wish I would have prepared for postpartum more. We did so much planning for the birth. We did so much planning for when the baby was going to be here. And now the baby's here. And I'm really struggling with how to eat or making sure I get enough sleep. So most of my clients do come to me in that phase. And of course, we work with the plan and we do whatever we can, but it's really nice to have everything kind of set in place and for you to really have that space and that time. And that what we call, like that first 40 days where you can really just focus on bonding and feeding and taking care of yourself during that time.
Okay. So you said something that's very interesting. You said some of the women talk about sleep, which seems to be impossible
Yep.
during postpartum, during those first few months. For me, it's still going on, even though it's like 10 minutes in. But
Yeah.
what do you suggest, as far as sleeping and, just being able to, I guess, get the energy that you need, but in order to do that, you have to sleep. Is there anything specifically that you tell your clients in order to help in that part of the journey in postpartum?
Like how to manage energy when you're sleep deprived.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it can get really tricky, especially when it comes to nutrition, right? Because we do get energy from our food. And so a lot of times, moms are coming to me and they're, going towards quick carbohydrates because those give you energy. But it's, understanding that managing the sleep is really going to help what I call reduce your vulnerability, right? So whatever that means for every family is going to be a little bit different, it's certainly a resource dependent thing if you're able to, in terms of social support as well, if you have family, if you have a postpartum doula that can help come in and help you prioritize sleep. In terms of like fueling nutritionally to support that, I think having a regular, consistent intake overall and making sure you're getting enough are probably the two of the biggest things that are going to help that. I think everyone's structure in terms of how they get support for prioritizing it is going to look a little bit different. But one of the things that also comes up is thinking about when I was writing the cookbook is that we just don't have a lot of time postpartum, right? Like new families are very busy, or if it's a growing family, there's not going to be a lot of time for cooking. And so having some quick options so that you can prioritize sleep and taking care of yourself are what really kind of come to mind.
Okay. So there's this, I don't know if it's a misconception or not, but for nursing mothers, some of the things that we should stay away from. And one of the things that I hear often or read often is stay away from spicy foods when you're nursing, because that it may affect the baby in some way, one way or another. What is your take on that? And is that something that you believe is true? Is it not true? Or how do you feel about the spicy food portion of a woman's diet?
Yes, it's a really, really common misconception. And there's a few pieces that kind of affect that answer. And this uses both like the nutrition side and also the lactation side. So first things first is that breast milk is made from your blood, which means that it's not made from the contents of your stomach. So there's also kind of a similar, idea around like what they consider gassy foods and how those are transferred into your milk. And that's actually not true, because breast milk is not made from the contents contents of your stomach. What is true, though, is that your baby's sensitivity level to either spice or foods that might produce gas in a mom's body is going to be dependent on what the diet was like during pregnancy. I know when I was pregnant, I craved spicy food all the time. So when I eat spicy food, when I was breastfeeding, it wasn't any kind of change for my daughter at that time because it was something that had been introduced throughout the pregnancy and in utero. However, if you have been doing no spicy food and then you're on a spicy food kick during breastfeeding, your baby might be a little bit more sensitive to that because it hasn't been introduced to it through pregnancy. But since pregnancy, is a direct line of what you're eating goes kind of directly to the baby, breastfeeding has kind of an extra layer. It now goes through your body and then it goes to your milk and then it gets to your baby. So it's even a little bit further removed, so to speak.
Okay. So, again, when my oldest son, he was born, he broke out a lot. So, I remember taking him to the pediatrician and the doctor was like, well, try and stay away from dairy. So let's cut down on your milk and your cheese and all of that. Is that kind of the same thing as far as with the spicy food? Do you feel the same way about that?
Yeah, that's another really great question because I think that is so common. I mean, probably more than half of the clients that I see are being told by their pediatrician that their baby is having some kind of reaction to dairy. And it's one of the most commonly recommended eliminations if there's some kind of issue that an infant's having a reaction. And it's actually a lot less common than we think. I think, I'm probably trying to remember the number, but it's pretty low. It's around 10% of babies actually have some type of dairy sensitivity or intolerance. What's more common is, depending on the type of birth or when the baby was delivered, babies have really premature guts. So, it's just kind of a tolerance issue in terms of their gut. But all in all, I don't recommend that mom start eliminating foods out of her diet entirely, especially if we really don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. So this is one of the pieces that I wish whenever, a pediatrician was giving this recommendation to a mom, that they also gave a recommendation to a dietitian because, I've had moms be so restricted and severely limited in their diets because they're obviously so afraid of anything affecting their baby through their milk. But what happens with a dairy allergy is that they're allergic to the protein. So your risk factors can be if you have a strong family history of allergies, or any, significant medical conditions that involve food intolerances, obviously you're going to be at a higher risk. However, it's not as common as moms are being told to eliminate it from their diet.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, so the good stuff is the actual recipes, or the recipes in your cookbook. So, having a newborn, if a woman has not, or a mom has not prepared these meals ahead of time, do you have a few recipes that you can suggest that will take 10 minutes or less, something that you can run in the kitchen, or even her partner, and just make really, really quick, and then actually period?
Yep. So what came to mind in terms of what's going to be quick, because some of them, I made many of them 15 to 20 minutes and they're pretty reasonable, but I was thinking of some snacks. If you wanted to take some ideas right now, one was, I have a recipe called caprese bites. So it's that Italian caprese. So cherry tomatoes, you can buy the round mozzarella cheese, drizzle it with some olive oil, balsamic vinegar, salt and pepper. Super flavorful, also has protein, calcium, and a little bit of antioxidants. So that's a really quick snack that you can kind of keep on hand. Another one that comes to mind that was pretty quick in the cookbook on the snacks and sides section is stuffed dates. In the cookbook, I have it with, dates and some different types of nut butters. You could also go savory and do crumbled blue cheese or feta cheese. And dates are a really great option because they're going to be pretty low volume. So they're not going to have, it's not going to feel like a ton of food on your plate, but they're going to be really energy dense. So those are really good options because you're if you're breastfeeding or you're recovering from birth, you really don't have a ton of time. So you need something that has enough energy, but that's also going to be quick and satisfying. And then the last one, and granted that the recipe for the granola is in the book. So that would be something, either you prepared the granola ahead of time or you had like a prepared granola already purchased. But doing the apricot granola I have in the book with like a yogurt and some honey and whatever your favorite toppings are. Yogurt is a really great option snack for postpartum. It has wonderful probiotics for gut healing. And then it also has a really good combination of some protein and calcium as well. So those are 3 little samples of just a small amount of the recipes you'll find in the cookbook. There's 75. So those are some of the snack options.
Okay, so I have been drinking an incredible amount of coffee since my youngest son was born. Now my schedule, the way my schedule is now, is because I have a 2.5-year-old, like I make him breakfast, which is different than the 9.5-month-old. And then I find that the 43-year-old, which is me, has no time to, make anything. So I would love to just like, even if there's like a nutritional drink or something in the refrigerator, do you have anything like for drinks as opposed to just food in the recipe book?
Yes, that's a really great question and super common. You're not alone in that hustle in the morning. In the cookbook, I have a few smoothie options. So those would take, maybe you can't just grab them and go, but they take, 2 to 3 minutes to kind of throw in, or you could even create like little smoothie packets with the frozen fruit options and then add in your protein powder and the other ingredients, and they're ready pretty quickly. And then I also have a golden milk recipe in the cookbook too that can be prepared ahead of time. Golden milk is one of the recipes that introduces some different spices, and it has a milk base. So it's more of like a latte without the caffeine in the morning, but it would give you a little bit of nutrition. It's something that's ready to go. So there's also, I was thinking too, Michelle, like this would be a good one for you to have kind of batch cooked in the beginning of the week. There's a baked pumpkin oatmeal and a few different variations of that where, you make a batch at the beginning of the week and you can kind of heat and serve, and it's ready to go. It's already pre-made. So that might be some quick options for you in the morning.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to, and I'll definitely try anything because I need something.
Yes.
Although I've been doing really good. I've been pureeing my son's food for the last few months. So that's been like great and amazing. I just haven't done anything for myself. But you mentioned putting protein packets in the smoothies. Is there something that you specifically recommend as far as the protein packs?
In terms of type or like what to combine it with?
Well, maybe brand, because I have never taken a protein shake or anything in life.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even know where to start, like where to go to get them. Because there's so many things on the market, you just don't know, which one you should take. I mean, should it be organic? Like, I have no idea. Can you just give a little information about that?
Absolutely. Yes, I think that's many of us in the store. There's all the brands, which one is best. I mean, a protein powder, I would say, and the one that's used in the cookbook is just what's called there's a whey protein, which is really just the protein kind of broken down into the very smallest molecule, which can be actually a really great mom for postpartum or just busy moms in general in the morning because it's going to give you a good amount of protein. And there's different ways you could use that, Michelle. You could put it in a smoothie like the recipes in the book. I've also had clients or moms, put it in their oatmeal to get a little bit more protein, even like in a little bit of yogurt as well. Typically, we don't need that much protein throughout the day, but it depends on how much time you have. So there's no particular brand, just because you can find a whey protein in a few different brands. But I would look specifically for whey protein, and then you can use it in a few of those different ways.
Okay. Now, do you have any suggestions about how many or how much protein we should have daily, or how much carbs, how many carbs we should have in a day? Do you have any of those suggestions?
Yes, I mean, that is the golden question of how much do we need? And, my approach as a dietitian is a little bit different in that, I don't kind of relegate myself to giving like those specific numbers. There's, general kind of recommendations. Like the general one would be 1 gram per kilogram of your body weight. I'm not going to calculate that for myself. That's just
Right.
not a typical kind of like realistic way for me to eat and go through about my day. My recommendation and what I teach my clients is to practice what's called intuitive eating, which is, essentially what our babies do. So your kids, Michelle, eat when they're hungry and stop when they're full, and they're not, judging their food as good or bad or too many carbs, too much protein, too little protein. Our body actually knows how to be able to regulate what it needs nutritionally. And we can kind of pair that with, some nutrition information we get, like the postpartum, information around nutrition of like, oh yeah, I should probably, bump up my protein a little bit. So let me add some protein powder, or, let me make sure that I kind of pair it with my snack. But it's, not really necessary for most people, outside of some conditions where you have to be more mindful about, categorizing and counting your different nutrition requirements to, calculate those on a day-to-day basis. So generally, I would say eating in accordance with your hunger and your body's cues. And especially if you're postpartum, your body's going to let you know. Most moms will tell you that they're ravenous postpartum because your body is giving you a signal that your needs are higher during that time. So I hope that answered the question. There's no specific or magic number. It really is going to be so different. I'm 5'8" versus someone who's 5 foot and, not active versus someone who's extremely active. But, certainly if you find that you want more of that specific information and that feels helpful for you, that's exactly what a dietitian can really help you with, the intuitive eating piece, but also kind of pairing it with some of the nutrition science as well.
Okay, and so the reason I asked that was because during this last pregnancy with my son, I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes, and so I was able really to avoid the metformin or the insulin by kind of taking care of my diet. But I did see a nutritionist, and she did give specific numbers as
Yep.
far as the proteins. Like you want this number of proteins versus this number of carbs, and I've been so off of that now. I don't even remember what those numbers are. But I mean, is it something similar to that? You kind of want to make sure if you're having a carb, you kind of want to balance it with the proteins, because you want to, as it was explained to me, you want to kind of like the proteins kind of like block the carbs going into your blood, like
Yes,
right
absolutely.
away. So is it something similar to that? You kind of want to monitor that.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. That is a really great example of, a condition where you might want to, you can still eat intuitively, even with gestational diabetes, or I see many clients that live with diabetes type 1 or type 2. And that doesn't mean that necessarily have to be relegated to always counting. We can kind of pair that with some of the nutrition information and also, having a general idea numbers wise where you're at. But what you were referring to, Michelle, is something that I touch on the Postnatal Cookbook as well, and that beginning information, which is, what's called our macronutrients. So that's our carbs, protein, and fats. How can we make sure that we're being mindful of pairing those appropriately? Because if we, don't include them together, then we can kind of set ourselves up to have our blood sugar rise and fall, which all of us have probably felt that. I use the term hangry, right? We all kind of know when our blood sugar is lower, we become more irritable, and it becomes harder to make a decision around food, or to think about what sounds good in that moment nutritionally. So when you are mindful about pairing, carbs, protein, and fat together at meal times in a way that feels good to you, then we can get more of that even blood sugar control.
Okay. All right. So that is a lot of good information. So again, can you tell everyone the name of the cookbook that you just released?
Yes. So it's the Postnatal Cookbook, and postnatal, is essentially, it's a term that's used interchangeably with postpartum, but referring to really what we call that 4th trimester, so that time after birth. And it's designed specifically with mothers who have just given birth and their nutrition needs in mind. So it talks about not only, what nutrition needs are and how those might vary depending on what type of birth you had, if you are choosing or want to breastfeed, but also gives you some of the recipes and some ideas of how to be able to apply them during postpartum.
Okay. And so, where can listeners pick your book up, and where can they find you in social media world?
Yes. So my practice is Full Circle, and it's spelled a little bit differently. So full is just the FULL, and the circle is CRCL, and that's my Instagram handle, Full Circle. My website is also Full Circle as well. And on my website, you can find a link to the Postnatal Cookbook. You can also buy it. We're all loving Amazon right now as we're at home. You can find it on Amazon. And then it's going to be at a few different retailers. So it'll be in Barnes and Noble, Indie Books, and let's see, there was one other, but I can't remember that one specifically right now. Those are the big ones that you can find the book from.
Okay, that's awesome. Awesome. So thank you again. Congratulations on the
Thank you
book. We will
so
definitely put your
much.
information in the show notes. And so everyone take a look at Jaren's cookbook, her website, and all the information, her Instagram page. And thank you so much again for coming on, and best of luck with the book. We'll be
Thank
looking for part
you.
two with another 75 recipes, right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it seemed like 75 recipes was quite a bit, but I think there could definitely be a need for more, or what we were talking about, moms who, maybe have allergies or gestational diabetes. There's lots of different needs. So, and if I can be of any more support to your group, or if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to help.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much again, and we will be in touch with you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.